What is up, Lighthouse Middle School? How you guys doing? Hope you guys are having a fantastic Wednesday. When you guys are watching this, we will be back from Winter Blast. I'm expecting that we have had an amazing time. I'm recording it before we went to Blast, but I'm expecting that we had a great time. And if you went to Winter Blast, you should share with your neighbors something awesome that happened, especially if they didn't go. And so yeah, hope you're having a great day. A couple of announcements before we get into our lesson for the night. First off, next week, wherever you are, don't go there. Come to church instead. We're going to meet all together, and we're going to have our other Q&A as expected. You guys have already asked a lot of questions about this topic. I'm probably not going to, probably not. I'm definitely not going to be able to get to all the questions you guys have asked. But hey, if you want to scan it and submit another one, maybe I can kind of lump it in with another one and answer your question if someone else has answered it already. So, it's anonymous, so I don't know who asked what, unless they put your name. Yeah. It's still January. January is a great time to think about the kind of things that you want to build into your life, into our lives, to help us make us more like Jesus. One of the things that we can do is to read our Bible, because it's going to help us to know Him, know who we are, and know what we ought to do because of that. So there's these devotionals. You can scan this QR code. It's also on your note sheet. Same with the Q&A question. You can scan it, and it's got devotionals about what we're talking about this month at youth group. Could be a really great way to kind of not just spend Wednesday night thinking about what we're talking about, but like all week long to kind of ruminate and consider and allow God to change who you are because of it. So, yeah, with that out of the way, let's get into the lesson for tonight. So welcome back to More to the Story, where we're exploring the greatest story that is worth knowing and sharing. And some very popular stories began quite differently from what we see on screen or read in the books. For example, when The Lord of the Rings grew into this multi-book saga, J.R.R. Tolkien revisited his earlier stories to make them match his new created works. And The Hobbit, which is the first of his novels set in Middle-earth, required a little bit of tweaking. He actually had to rewrite a whole chapter when one of the main characters, Bilbo, discovered the all-powerful ring, if you're familiar with Lord of the Rings. And after answering a set of riddles, he won it from the character Gollum. But now, with these new stories that Tolkien wrote, he realized the ring was so powerful that Gollum would never give it up. So he went back and he changed his story, and he made it so Bilbo found the ring in the dark before he even ran into Gollum. He strategically rewrote it to make it even better. Have you ever considered how you'd rewrite your own story if given the chance? Would you introduce some new characters to offer support during challenging times? Maybe you prefer to erase some uncomfortable or painful memories. And just as writers face limitations in editing published works, the stuff that's already come out, we can't go back and alter every aspect of our personal stories after they've already happened, right? But does that mean that we're going to be stuck kind of revisiting those challenges full of the shame or regret that that brings? Let's dive into a story from the life of Jesus to shed light on these questions. So, sometimes we can think that people in the Bible, that maybe they had everything figured out, that they had it all right. But the reality is that apart from Jesus, everyone struggled with the effects of evil and sin like we talked about last week. And the good news is that God didn't run away from that messiness. He runs toward it, actually. We see this in Jesus. He hung out with misunderstood people, often deemed too far gone, and in the most complicated situations. He wasn't scared of their stories, and he wouldn't run from your story either. So, let's read from the book of Luke here. Luke chapter 7. This is on page 643, starting in the small number 36. We'll read till 39, and then we'll read the rest of it a little bit later. So this is one of the Pharisees. Pharisees are the religious leaders of the time, asked Jesus to have dinner with him. So Jesus went to his home and sat down to eat. When a certain immoral woman from that city heard he was eating there, she brought a beautiful alabaster jar filled with expensive perfume. And she knelt behind him at his feet, weeping. Her tears fell on his feet, and she wiped them off with her hair. She kept kissing his feet and putting perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, If this man were a prophet, he would know what kind of woman is touching him. She is a sinner. So this story introduces us to a woman who has lived far from God. We don't know her name. We know a little bit about her past. It says that she was immoral, which means she didn't do right and good things. And people marginalized her because of her mistakes. We don't know how she got into her situation, but most people don't choose a life of being ostracized from their community unless they're kind of out of options. She probably felt like she wore a label that said ruined. But she was still curious about Jesus. She'd probably seen him connecting with others in her community defined by their past. She saw that Jesus was kind and gracious and befriended vulnerable people others had pushed aside. So she courageously went into a home where she was not really welcomed. One of the religious leaders, this Pharisee named Simon, was not thrilled that she was there, but she didn't let that attitude get in the way of connecting with Jesus. She washes his feet with perfume, which is a massive sacrifice on her part. The perfume was worth 1 year of her wages. Not only was it a financial sacrifice, but her decision to honor Jesus this way was kind of dangerous. She didn't know what the religious leaders would do to her for breaking all of these kind of cultural rules. But Jesus protects her, helps us see that she's not defined by the labels she and others had placed on her. She wasn't ruined. She could be forgiven. She was already loved. And through her encounter with Jesus, her future was now filled with possibilities because there can be more to her story. But let's read on here. A few verses down, 39, and we'll read all the way to 50. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know what kind of woman is touching him. She is a sinner. And Jesus answered his thoughts. Simon, he said to the Pharisee, I have something to say. Go ahead, teacher, Simon replied. And Jesus told them this story. A man loaned money to 2 people, 500 pieces of silver to one, and 50 pieces to the other. But neither of them could repay him, so he kindly forgave them both, canceling their debts. Who do you suppose loved him more after that? Simon answered, I suppose the one for whom he canceled the larger debt. That's right, Jesus said. He turned to the woman and said to Simon, look at this woman kneeling here. When I entered your home, you didn't offer me water to wash the dust from my feet, but she has washed them with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You didn't greet me with a kiss, but from the time I first came in, she's not stopped kissing my feet. You neglected the courtesy of olive oil to anoint my head, but she has anointed my feet with rare perfume. I tell you, her sins, and they are many, have been forgiven. So she has shown me much love. But a person who is forgiven little shows only little love. Then Jesus said to the woman, your sins are forgiven. The men at the table said among themselves, who is this man that he goes around forgiving sins? And Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. So the woman who anointed Jesus has a very different story than the religious leader in Simon's story. Simon lived with an air of superiority. He thought he was better than the woman and was skeptical about Jesus. He thought there was no way a holy person would associate with a woman like that. So Jesus tells a parable. And in this parable, it's as if Jesus is saying, do you see past her history and what everyone says about her? Do you see her like I see her? Jesus was inviting Simon to see people's stories differently than he was used to. His story had been limited because the way he saw others was limited. He believed he was only good because he lived by the rules. Thought he was important because he had worked hard, and felt loved because he kept up a specific image. Soon, though, Simon saw how Jesus loved the woman not for what she'd done, but for who she was, made in the image of God. And he was inviting him into a new way of living. Simon didn't have to find his worth in slapping labels on people or meeting specific standards. If he chose to sit with Jesus and think about these moments in his home, his story could be changed. As we read this story today, some of you might resonate with the woman's experience. Feel like others have labeled you based on your past choices. Others of you might kind of connect with Simon. You find your identity by kind of maybe pretending to have it all together. It may make you feel better to point out the brokenness in other people's lives instead of actually just addressing your own. But for all of us, God's invitation is the same. He's able to forgive you. He sees beyond your sin and wants to help you envision a new future, because there can be more to the story. And in this story, we see 2 people who needed God's grace. The woman needed to know her past did not define her, and Simon needed to know he wasn't defined by comparing himself to others. We can see our story differently when we realize we are loved for who we are, not what we do. Ultimately, Jesus wants us to know that our relationship with God and each other is made right through what He did in His life, death, and resurrection. And now, we simply must have faith in Him, trusting Jesus has the power to rewrite our story. And we can sometimes be quick to accept the labels that people put on us. Sometimes we might even put labels on ourselves. But we need to learn that what Jesus says about us is the most important and the truest thing about who we are. You aren't your past mistakes. You aren't defined by the person who walked out on you. You aren't the trophies on your shelf. You aren't the D on your report card. You aren't living in your older sibling's shadow. You are loved. Sin may have derailed what God hoped for you, but your story can be completely different because of what God has done in Jesus. He has the power to rewrite any story. Through His death on the cross and resurrection, your story and our world's story don't have to end in brokenness, darkness, and defeat, because Jesus can rewrite our stories. And now we've read throughout the Bible that Jesus doesn't expect us to clean up our stories on our own. He invites us to come as we are with our stories and have faith that He can make it right. If you want to open yourself to that reality this week, here's how you can do that today. First, we repent. We take a look at the reality of our life, the relationships, and our world. We have all contributed to the damage. How have you tried to define good and evil on your own and tried to get your needs met in ways God never intended, like we talked about last week? That's sin. Tell God you're sorry for how you've hurt yourself, how you've hurt others in His world. And then we receive. Once we apologize for damaging the world, each other, and our relationship with God through sin, He offers us forgiveness. It's more than just a one-time thing. He wants to give us a new way of operating in the world, His way of living and seeing the world, ourselves, and others. He gives you the same power to live and work in the world that animated His life through the Spirit, the third person of the Trinity. And then finally, we want to reorient our life. Receiving God's forgiveness is an amazing start to the new life that we have with God. And He gives us that same power that motivates and moves in Him, that Spirit of God. We don't need to return to living out our old story. For Jesus to rewrite our story, we must reorient our entire life, to follow Him and His way of life. This may take some time. We're not always going to get it right. And thankfully, when it comes to following Jesus, He asks for growth, not perfection. Begin to rethink your life and consider what Jesus did. And recognize that in Jesus, God took all the evil we have made in the world into the grave with Him. God disarmed its destructive power in our lives when God raised Jesus from the grave. You've done nothing to earn this. This invitation is available to receive Jesus' presence and trust that He can direct you in every season and every moment of your life. Last week we discussed that sin isn't the end of the story. Today we talked about how through Jesus, God can take our story and make something different out of it. When we see no hope, Jesus sees possibility, because Jesus can make all things new. He can rewrite our stories. So what we got for the lesson tonight, we're going to switch it over to small group. Quick reminder, wherever you are tonight, don't go there. Go to church next week for a large group. I'm looking forward to seeing you then. Love you guys.